For all of you trying your best to piece all this together, to make some personal use out of it, which is ultimately the only use it can be, to find your own personal way, as either taxing or challenging, according to your view, as the first part of me reading these at night may be, I do not bring them just at random. They're put together each night specifically to be together. And although I can't say that there is a particular theme every night, because the theme stays the same, it never changes, but you could say that each of these constitutes like a series of counter melodies within the main theme, and that if you can keep it in mind, on almost any night there are 4, 5, 6 counter themes, counter melodies in there that are pieced together. That is, there might be 10 different ones thrown out, number 2, number 6, number 12, that could actually all go on one page. I can make it all one item and it'd just be, a paragraph long. But it's done for a reason, so that you participate if you can hold it in mind. But they're not just random one-liners that I got in a big old box and pull them out each night. They are pieced together, they're separated purposefully. I keep them apart in certain ways. There's no real great numerical magic to it, but like say tonight, if there are 10 actual themes in here, minor themes under the auspices of the major non-ending theme, then they are themselves cut up into different verses, and the verses are not put together. They're purposefully cut in, sometimes just a one line. But there would then perhaps be another 8 or 10 that could be either just 1 or 2 lines or a longer page tied to it that all has one particular motif to it, or there too. So this is Series 93, 124, items 1 through 91. If you think that religion is serious business, if you think that politics is serious business, if you think that business is serious business, and you ain't got no business listening to this. Conversation from the dugout. Many people who don't know shit can still talk like they do. And who does this fool? Others who don't know shit. Is it time to play ball now? I thought you'd never ask. A man with his own elevator doesn't need an operator. 4th floor, sports equipment, and more sports equipment. All out, every man for himself. Once, in the beginning, everyone had a secret love, but then it got named, tagged, and identified, and everyone's ardor waned. Children know what's serious and what's not. That's why children don't talk. By the more or less first of each month, this one man would pay all of last month's bills, a trick he said he picked up from life. How spatiality affects routine mental perception. Long ideas tax attention. Short ones, credulity. How a song title can lighten one's heavy load. The life of an aphorist may not be a happy one, but at least it's brief. The man stood and said to the assembled, the full text of what I have to say is in this definition: murder, the ultimate pastime. And someone immediately asked him, you do mean that figuratively and not literally, do you not? And the man replied, will it make any difference to you which it is? And the person in the crowd said, it most assuredly will. So the man said, in that case, I decline to answer. There was once this sailor who expressed his morning weather attitude thusly: if it doesn't clear up by 11, it's not going to clear up. In private, he had further developed the unspoken position of not particularly caring what the weather did. When he picked her up that evening, she said, you sure do look good, to which he replied, maybe, but you look better. Later that night alone, he tried to replay the same scene between himself and his mind. Once basic survival needs are met, then men must believe that there are other reasons to live, so they get together and invent some. This is known as civilization. Mental rambunctiousness reconsidered. One man marked himself fragile, then commenced to throw himself about. Historical definitions. Religions. Man's first attempt at flea collars for the insects of the mind. Update addendum. Psychology. The attempt to housebreak them and make them behave. Addendum. Governments. The approach of either shape up or shoot them. A quick guide to considering certain aspects of mortal existence. There are no such things as more important ideas or less important ones. There are only ideas that you make important for yourself. Although this is not technically correct, it is technically correct enough for those who know what I'm talking about. A thumb guide to certain culinary arts and aspects. Thoughts are like peanut butter. How so? They just are. On this planet, man operates under the strictest of conditions, just like everyone else. Another day, another view. When it comes to trying to personally understand more about life than life believes is necessary for man in general, it's kind of like this. You sort of got your choice. You can either throw your underwear up in a tree or not wear any. The most common thread of criticism running through biographical surveys of famous people is that their private life did not match their public one. What notes this other than the two different worlds of neurons and hormones? Okay, due to porous demand, look through here and we'll try it again. The difference between the merely civilized and a more conscious man is that the civilized pretend to care about one another, while the more conscious just pretend to pretend. One part of the city grabbed the man's legs and another part his head, as they both stood and sang, "Which so proudly we break at the twilight's last gleaming." Every neighborhood has its own indigenous amusements. Where do you live at, Buster? Remember, any snare you may note into which men do fall can also capture you. This is the nature of traps. This is the character of criticism. In the post-survival days, after the great flood of speech, it may turn out that a quiet man is a happy man. For the above to prove operative and profitable, you must personally have a clear understanding of just when are the post-survival times, and have knowingly passed through and rode out the great verbal flood that normally drowns all earthbound intellects. Why this trek seems so tortuous? You can't go somewhere new that you want to go till you've been somewhere that, looking back, you wish you hadn't gone. A viewer inquires, is it somehow possible to develop a bad memory that works in reverse? The perfectly obvious giving a perfectly good name and mailing address for the benefit of those to whom it was not previously perfectly obvious. If you live in the mind, there will you also perish. A gentleman contacts us to say, I used to be anxious, but I'm not anymore. Self-inflicted query, why, in all of man's holy books, do none of them have a section of letters to the editor? Medical news. Men who talk to themselves tend to live a long time. 10 million years thus far. Metaphors, myths, and allegories. Excuse tickets, this is a definition, by the way, of metaphors, myths, and allegories. Excuse tickets some passengers use in an attempt to never have to get off the bus. Standing alone on a dusty road out in the open heartland as the Greyhound rapidly disappears in the distance can give one a whole new regard for the term plain and point blank. Teachers striking the hands of unruly children is an act taken from a more conscious man's attempts not to cling to the thoughts of his mind. How life continues to work in spite of you knowing about it. Figure on stage with the papers in his hand reads, "A man with a gun can make you run, but a man with a knife can cut you a piece of pie." And a woman in the audience with a clipboard asks, "Would you be a bit more specific in what you actually intend by that?" See? See what I mean? Allegory for the intellect. One man shot himself in the privates, then announced to himself, "That's what you get for having privates." And a viewer says, "I sure am glad that was a damn allegory, son." A man's ignorance seems more acceptable if it sounds real sincere. The tale of the two brothers. One of them wanted to get his own show so that he could take it on the road. The other one wanted to get his own life, and when he did, he did. Okay. There's also an electromagnetic story of the three brothers, but you don't have enough ears to hear it. Advanced fanfare for circus aficionados. You don't have to run away and join a high-wire act to test your skill. The balancing act properly challenging to a more conscious man is always available at home. "Remember this," said a man to his burgeoning intellectual operations, "if you can think, you can spit in the wind." Wants are natural and to be fulfilled. But those talked about present unique difficulties. More? Oh, more? What? More? Yes, more. Really? More? Yes. More examples of how the mind wished things worked. There was this one chap who lived a simple, unrecognized plebeian life, but who wanted to be buried after death in a grand manner fit for Egyptian royalty. But this desire itself was mortally wounded when, in his will, he critically misspelled the word esophagus. The mind of the city continually reminded its constituents, remember, a point-blank answer is not a proper answer. And all the little cows nodded and mooed. Nah, wait up. Lay down. Relax. You too can be massaged by words. For those of you who are interested in such materials, you might care to know that regarding the concept of there being evil afoot in creation, myths from several other universes call it by several other names, several of them being hurried, complacent, food, real spicy food, insouciance, and overseriousness. The speaker presented his postulate. Oh. At least I didn't say shoulder arms, but and therein brag. But the speaker presented his postulate. To wit, the more people they are, the dumber they are. And a man in the audience stood and asked, "Are your comments directed to concerns of population or of intellect?" And the speaker replied, "You people shut up and sit down." Thought, the permanent dream. Thought, the continuing illusion. Could it be otherwise? Perhaps. Nice group of helps. You know the answer.
Yeah.
The personal motto of this one man is, God must have loved habits because he made so many of them. My own addition, if I may, to this, a fool and his motto are not soon parted. And before all of you spiritually inclined people write to me with your suspicions that this in fact refers to mankind in general and his long-running relationship to religion, ask yourself, is my irritation worth the price of a first-class stamp? Do I even know the correct mailing address of this program? And would it not be easier just to fume in mental private as so long has been now my bent? God must have loved habits because he made so many of them. Many people seeking routine entertainment do not like to be called habits. Our official program slogan, if we ain't here to serve, we ain't really here. And do know we ain't really here. It's just your imagination run wild again. Man and his many conditions, civilized, a state produced by talking about living. Being even more civilized, an increase in the talking. The sage said, if you give a name to a place where people have not yet been, they will eventually tend to believe otherwise, and therein is the risk. And a follower responded, I understand all of that, but couldn't you at least put a dependable name on the effort to get there? The terminal call for the transcendental traveler. All aboard? Train with no name, on track with no number, going to God knows where. First, final, and eternal call to all of you with no more baggage who've lost your names. First and fabulous call. All aboard. You know who you are. The difference between an expert and a more conscious man. An expert in any field wants the field to continue. A more conscious man has no such desire. Notice, the equation explaining how human thought expands without actually going anywhere is not presently available for public dissemination. You are thanked for your forbearance. One day a certain man suddenly stopped and thought, if we are what we eat, then from whence and for what purpose did man pick up the habits of cannibalism and self-consumption? When civilization speaks, everyone listens. And after the meal, the collective sighs a hearty burp of relief. At the bottom of every page is a man who believes he is his own man. Purposes, spelled with a capital P and with a small one. Having a normally operating mind will normally keep a man busy and distracted enough that he won't try and push his mind beyond that point. And a viewer with a normal mind says, it damn near made sense. As his personal incantation, one man uses, mind your manners, Xenofat, I have a shoehorn in my hat. He says that although he is not certain as to which deity this directly appeals, he says that since adopting it, he has won 2 free subscriptions to Reader's Digest and has not been struck by lightning in well over a year. Regarding his attempts to do something extraordinary, as one man contemplated the continuing difficulties he had with his mind, he reflected, how much longer can this go on? And his mind said, how long you got? Yeah. Interesting sidebar. In some universes, this kind of humor is not considered particularly funny. A viewer writes, don't try and tell us when something you're about to say is interesting or not. We, the audience, will be the judge of that. Sounds good, but if you were correct, and you could so determine, you wouldn't be the audience. One guy got so far ahead that he got behind. Then he got so far behind that he got way ahead. The name of this piece is Time and Your Head. The more conscious you are, the closer to the equator. One man privately mused, once you're not as routinely dumb as you once were, you sure can spot it in others. It's hard to hide anything in a box from a box. The great cosmological myths of this one galaxy had it that God's original name was Cardboard Carton. That being so, I guess they seldom prayed for rain for fear of blasphemy. You see, son, noted a dad to a lad, the problem's not in taking life seriously, but in taking what you think about it so. Holding a hot pan is not the problem. Wanting to is. You see, son, gripping the handle seriously is not the problem. Believing that you should is. Okay, for you literate-minded, the definition of it. Seriousness. Wants put into words. In preparing for the upcoming indelicate neurosurgery, the man asked the doctor to please leave this note pinned to his brain. My mind is like fly paper and thoughts flies. But the surgeon said his specialty was neither in redundancy nor the naturally obvious and declined. One man so states, I believe that there is such a real useful thing as mysticism if I ever see a sane 18-year-old boy who is a mystic. By the way, Tonto, he got you. Oh, and now, music lovers, from the classical side, let's move over to the country charts and check what's going on. The ordinary flee death, a real man stupidity. Oh, and remember that next week during the same time slot, the Lakers will be playing Shostakovich. Forget about actually doing it, fumes one man. I sometimes go entire days without even thinking about it. Some years later, and before this incident, another man so mused, perhaps it is better not to even know about this kind of thing. Then at least you can't ever be concerned about not pursuing it vigorously enough. This, of course, was not a man talking, but civilization itself. The reason life has you born young and anxious and then grow old and blasé is the same reason that when you call and ask about the rates for a limo, instead of them telling you right off the bat that's going to cost you at least $300, they'll say that the car itself is figured at $80 an hour with a minimum of 3 hours and the driver's gratuity adding another 25% to the total. It just sounds better that way. Such is maturing the way they do it in the city. Intrigues at court and partial intrigues at center court. Those who believe in a personal God always prove short on having their own person. And the king inquired, should I take this then as a direct criticism of the royal priest? But I shall not answer that, inasmuch as if that was really the king, he wouldn't ask such a question. One man had a book whose title was Ideas Most Often Misspelled and Mispronounced. And whose picture do you think was the rubric for each chapter? Go ahead, guess. The otter looked incredulously at the elk and replied, hey, if I'd wanted to be in showbiz, I'd been born a human. The mortal mind can assist man in many undertakings. Getting out of performing, however, is not one of them. "Why, I am absolutely amazed," said the magic trick to the magician, to which he replied, "You're amazed." And the audience in his head went totally wild. The captain turned to the first mate and instructed, "Go below and batten down the underlying key and the one with the exclamation point, pronto." Conversation heard between a library and an office building. No, not between the structures themselves. Between two men in a parking lot between the two buildings. First voice. It's a dialogue. First voice. "One man went so fast he never had time to read." Second voice. "Well, why didn't he slow down?" First voice. "Oh, he wasn't actually going anywhere. He was just thinking." Advisory for city tourists. Warning. Men with dictionaries think they know a lot. Warning. Life will back them up. Over in a corner, partially hidden by some boxes, one man thought. One man thought, one of the distinctive snares in trying to become a mystic is that it will almost inevitably make you at some point become even more serious. And all the children held hands, and on the count of 3, all shivered real good, and then went out to play. And find a proofreader. Pop quiz. How does a more perceptive man spell regrets? Y-E-S-T-E-R-D-A-D-A-Y. And a viewer writes, "I like it so much better when you use terms like a more perceptive man rather than a mystic or a more conscious man. Terms like those give me the willies." Dear Mr. Viewer, I know, which explains why I don't use them when I don't and why I do when I do. Explaining his non-social behavior and lifestyle, one man confides, "I listened to some people talk once. Didn't care for it." Are you sure we're doing ourselves a service to laugh at that? I'm the one that read it. I'm the one that wrote it. Another myth from another world. Their God told the thinking creatures, his pinnacle of creation, "I'm going to give you a benefit, a blessing, the knowledge of death. But to balance this out, I'll also give you a knowledge that is a curse, this same knowledge of death." Now, if I may be permitted to add my own little editorial observation, is this not just like a God? Is this not just like knowledge? A man not striving to bring his mind under control is a walking time bomb. No, he's no danger to anyone else, but his mind remains a clock, and sequential chronology will eventually kill him. There's a head wound. How to know more without having to go back to school. On the post-survival playing field, only the dumb defend themselves. A student attempting to sign up for a correspondence course asked, "Are you sure this is the kind of information I really want to know?" Kids these days. Introduction to Post-Temporal History, 6th semester. Civilization won the war before the battle actually began by firing off endless unseen salvos of cliches at man. Kids. Kids and cliches these days. Crib note. Those easily offended have no trouble being so. Oh, don't deny it. Another example of, oh no, oh yes, of how it is. A man who can think doesn't give a damn what you think. Now see, that wasn't so bad, now was it? Well, I guess not unless you're one of the yous you referred to.
Yeah.
On a more scientific footing, you might care to note that the above dictum, a man who can think doesn't give a damn what you think, is actually the electromagnetic chemical basis for such concepts as tolerance, forgiveness, and the like. As the crowd applauded the band's last song, a man at the bar shook his head as he repeated and reflected on the words he had just heard sung. Any man that really needs some woman to lean on is nothing but a wimp. And a waitress passing by who had a color photograph of a steel guitar in her pocket said, I am assuming that your philosophical observation is in truth not actually based on any gender considerations, but is indeed aimed at everyone's relationship to their own consciousness. And he immediately asked her to dance. How, when you're shortchanged, words can take you a long way if you don't have far to go. One man gives his present address as Route 2, Horse Intercourse, Oklahoma. He says he knows it doesn't sound all that nice, but insists that it is an improvement over the name of where he used to live. A viewer writes, at times, for brief moments, it's almost as though I can think without actually thinking. Am I on the right track? Another way to tell indeed that, as per normal city standards, you are getting old. Are growing up. Is that you have liver spots on your brain. On this same subject, one of our foreign correspondents sends you along this message, quoting, why don't you just face it? Just look right at it on the simple basis of what the words actually mean. To be grown is to be completed. To be a finished product. To be grown is to be dead. Happy are the children who, alone, know they're still children. One of the functions of religion is to give the non-creative a sense of having a personal philosophy.
Yeah.
Turns out that if you remember, the oblique, spurious church of the air's foremost hymn is, by amazing grace, we're in your face. One man thusly pondered, if the true origin of thoughts is not in my head and not my university, then they must be in my stomach.
Yeah.
Then it must be the origin in my stomach. He paused as he pondered a bit onward, then thought further. But then the question becomes, from where do my guts get this food that causes such disturbance up here in my mind? I just proofread it. Man pondered, if the true origin of thoughts is not in my head, it's not in my university, in my background, then it must be in my stomach. Then he pondered, but then that brings the question of, from where do my guts get the kind of food that causes such disturbances? In my head. Karma explains from a Kmart kind of view. One man stopped in the electronics department long enough to note this. In a previous life, I was a dog, but I'm surely not simply standing still, for this time around, I'm dog shit. Men have come up with the notions of previous and subsequent lives due to their inability to realize that the concept of eat or be eaten is not an either-or situation. Man, the city, the arts. For his part of the performance, one man defecated in his hand and threw the results at the audience. It was all that he could do. The people were disgusted. The critics loved it. Life understood. That was all he could do. Man, the city, the arts. Bothered, a poem. Bothered, well, specifically a poem for the mind. Bothered. Bothered. We are what we eat and what eats us. Yeah. One father so advised the son, if you want to stay relatively sane and satisfied for your 60 or so years on this planet, don't ever start looking toward the edges of the universe. Yeah. Surveying himself in a wide-angle motoring mirror, one man mused, taken as a visible whole, I am a pre-war, 8-passenger, dual-cowl, drop-top, Pathian roadster. I do, however, in all truthfulness, seem to be powered by the mental engine of a 52 nice Rambler. A man rushed into the testing laboratory, exclaiming in terror, my brain's been pickled. And a technician replied, but that's not possible, you're still alive. The man said, what's that got to do with it? One man's mind cried out, drugs, drugs, more drugs is what we need. And the man replied, I know, I'm thinking as fast as I can. The responsibility of the civilized is to make civilization, by their talk, seem more and more complicated. Standing yon, under a spreading mechanics tree, one man offers this verbal spree. My personal motto when it comes to thinking is, put the pedal to the metal. Now, if I just had a pedal and some metal, anyone who smiles when you call them nuts may have something to smile about. Neurons and hormones, do-si-do. The mind does the dancing, but the stomach picks the beat. And a wallflower standing by the wall injects. You call that back to back? Yes, young jitterboogers, it doesn't matter what you call it, just as long as you get out on the floor. And all of those still breathing heaved. We's afraid of that. In the midst of a going well spell, as he began to frantically whirl about in place, this one chap sang, I could have danced all night, nay, if not eternally. And some lightning nearby said to some clouds, watch this. Hint, if you ever do mean forever, don't spell it. If you quote someone, you don't have to think. If you study someone's text and get a degree, you don't have to think. If you're an expert of any sort, you don't have to think. If you simply get grown, you don't have to think. Question. What good, probably, is thinking anyway? The mind runs on mind time. But in case you haven't yet discovered, that's not the only clock around. A jazz musician attempting an intellectual description of how he improvises is not unlike a man with an increased range of consciousness trying to tell you how he got there. Or, ragtime is far too ragged to be discussed in polite company. One man gave him and his mind the name Bobby King and the Kingpins, but he still couldn't get them booked anywhere. Yep, far too ragged. Query, do ideas that turn into action speed up or slow down? Query, might all of man's creation stories have the process backwards? Query: why would something greater turn itself into something lesser? That was an allegorical, dramatic move. Down-home tip for around-the-world travelers. If you let people question you about your personal life, well, first thing you know, you'll have one. Man, the wondrous illusion of all illusions. An apparent closed system within a closed system. Wonder of wonders, illusion of illusions. Condensed, unified version of all creation myths and their mortal aftermaths. Listen up, this is it. On the way to the train station, everyone got mugged. After many years of having a basically functioning brain, one man thought, why should I think thoughts that upset me, that make me sad, frightened, or in any other way displeased? And his mind suddenly jumped in and said, you idiot, why don't you shut up? Some additional movie tone news. One fellow says that looking back now at his life, the whole soundtrack of his life, including the main theme, seems to have been no more than mere incidental music. The heading of this particular item is, Sing to us, O great hula, sing to us of captivity and torture. That's the title. You'll always think if you care what you think about. A viewer submits, after listening to all this and thinking it all over for myself, I've concluded that people interested in extraordinary stuff like this are just children who never grew up in a particular kind of way. After many years of extraordinary efforts to do this thing, one day, one man suddenly glanced down while in the shower to discover that he momentarily had 4 arms. So it was me that said that a lot of those were connected, eh? In response, I say, prove it. Yeah. And being the sly devil I am, I say, no, you prove they're not. Yeah. How about to give a jumping off place for a minute, somewhat of a refinement of seeing what civilization is, which is the physical manifestation of everything that is non-survival in man, is everything that springs from the level of consciousness upward. No matter what it is what I mean, is included in civilization. It is everything that is a physical manifestation. It is everything that is sensually exemplary and identifiable in man that is not in any other creature. That is civilization. And sort of the refinement of things I'd point out before is this one that says the never-ending responsibility of the civilized, which is everyone. You don't start off jumping past being civilized, you go through it, which is another one I didn't pull out. But to go anywhere new, you've got to already been somewhere that looking back, you may complain about, which is what everyone tries, is the position everyone's in who tries to do something extraordinary. You don't try to do something extraordinary if you're an ordinary person and go, Jesus, life is an absolute unconditional gas. I could not be happier. I can't even conceive of being happier than I am now. No. Not routine. Not slop. I'm a pig in gold-plated slop. Whoever that would be, that would be the kind of person, in a sense, that would be dead. That'd be a grown person. But everything else continues to move. civilization continues to move. There was also in their definition, if any of you picked it up, that point out that the normal, well, I'm paraphrasing myself, but that the human intellect, the progress of the human intellect, which is the progress of man at that level, the civilized level, is the only kind of expansion, is the only kind of movement that doesn't go anywhere. As it does not change the actual individual position of the people. It's just a fact. Wherever you are now, many of you grew up that they thought it was impossible for space travel. And then people land on the moon. So what? What'd that do to you? Now, if you were sitting up late at night and saw it live, you might have thought, boy, that was really something neat. It was better than watching old black and white movies. Or they may find a cure for tuberculosis. They may come up with a male contraceptive pill. They may send men now to Mars before you die. They may come up with a brand new theory that's widely acceptable or accepted as the one unifying theory, or close, 1.5 maybe, unifying theory of everything. Which, in one view, from a civilized view, from a pastime view, you can say, well, that's all neat. I'd like to be around here. I'd like to read about it. I'd like to see it on TV. Okay. But does it have any effect on you individually at that level? No. Does not. So, in a sense, civilization continues to move, it continues to expand, and it continues to progress. We've got to call it something. So I'm going to call it progress. It's either that or maybe pita bread. Faulty transmission. So we'll call it progress. But it's as far as the individual at that time, in that lifetime, it is the only kind of progress, the only kind of expansion. We actually add knowledge. There are more and more books. Libraries have to have annexes built to them. So there's more and more knowledge, which is civilization. It's all of this. And it continues to expand. But what does it do to you? How does it affect you? Where does it take you individually? Nowhere. It's just a fact. But a refinement of this, which gets down to what I was trying to get you to see was a practical use of it, as this one points out, the never-ending responsibility of the civilized, everybody, is to make civilization, by their talk, seem more and more complicated. Attempting to be periodically, or appearing to be as humble, non-specific, non-personal as I am, and say I submit and I write these little things. Let's be blunt. That's what's known as an FF. A blanking fact. It's not an idea, it's not a theory. It is, well, it's worse than a frigging fact. See, I didn't say fuck it. It's a point blank fact. That's a lot worse at the civilized level. That is simply a fact. So, without skipping around and playing maybe and it's an interesting idea, let's assume, just for the sake of a few more minutes, that is a goddamn fact. Just nobody can see it. So the whole job, once you're civilized, which we're all civilized, you may be past the point, but at one time we were all civilized. The job of the civilized continues. Every generation, it never stops, no matter where you are, no matter what age you are, no matter which generation. The non-ending responsibility of the civilized is, via their talk, is to make things seem to be more and more complicated. That is progress. Once you see that as a fact, you have got to then, I don't know, revert to some sort of stage of intellectual incompetence that boggles the organ in charge of perceiving boggles.
Yeah.
You got to be stupider than is imaginable. You got to back up. Once you realize that's a fact, then to ever have any criticism, of course, now your mind's going to have it. That's what we're dealing with. Because the mind is run on half time power off of what seems to be negative energy, criticism, which is necessary for the civilized. But if you can ever get free, don't use that surgeon I mentioned. If you can get somebody else in your head I'll pass out cards later. You remember the surgeon, this guy was about to undergo that semi-delicate, no, it was actually indelicate, neurosurgery, and he asked the surgeon, once he was in there and had it open, would he leave this note pinned to his brain that said, my mind is as flypaper and thoughts flies. And the surgeon pointed out, whether you could hear it, it was listed as 2 areas of specialties. I could tell in the paper because they were in cap letters, plus I wrote the damn thing. But the surgeon said no, he couldn't do that because his specialties were not in either of the areas of redundancy or the naturally obvious. Which, all he was representing was the fact that somebody say, my mind is driving me nuts. In one sense, a good surgeon, a good psychiatrist, a good doctor, a good priest, a good transmission mechanic, all those things, I humbly have to tell you, me being the exemplary example thereof. For someone, if they knew what they were doing, the world came to me and said, which they would like to somebody, and said, my mind is driving me crazy, and the tacit question being, or part of that is, can you help me? Yes. Yes. Nobody else will, but hell, I'll tell you the damn truth. You say, my mind is driving me crazy. That's the purpose of the mind. Once you realize that, unless you, as I said, unless you in some way can revert to even more infantile idiocy, that doesn't take a lot off your mind. That doesn't take a load off your back. That takes everything off of you. To say, my mind is driving me crazy. See, this is the kind of thing, we're back to what I've been trying to get you to consider the last few times we've been meeting. It's the sort of thing that the mind will not think about, or it can't think about, and I was, of course, hinting that it damn sure can think about, because you can tell it that, and just that fast, it knows it's true. There's no reason life hadn't had me shot now. No, half shot. The mind hears it, but it is so irrelevant, it is so moot, it is so impertinent to the ordinary stability of civilized life, that the human mind, it turns, and it was just like, it actually hit people's mind. They saw it. It was a clear picture. The electrochemical balance of what I said, make any ordinary man's brain, it goes through. It doesn't short circuit him. It doesn't drive him crazy. He doesn't explode. But it's so irrelevant, he sees it's true, but he just looks away. That being, don't lose your place, that they'd come to me if they knew what they were doing and stop wasting their money on churches and religion and booze. Well, churches and religion. and psychiatrists. You know, hey, putting the Lutherans out of business is one thing, but, you know, the Jack Daniel distilleries. But if they knew what they were doing, and they would skip all these religions and psychiatrists and everything else, and they'd come direct to me and say, my mind is driving me crazy, I could tell them the truth, and you'd be done with it. You know, what's the problem? That's the purpose of the mind. That's why that guy told the guy that going into the indelicate brain surgery, which is what that was. In case none of you see what the point of that was, it wasn't just me playing with words by saying a man preparing for indelicate neurosurgery. See, it was kind of a play on an old cliche. They always say, man's about to have delicate brain surgery. You know, such as, you know, what other kind is? Are you going to call in, you know, Hubert that actually works now at American Transmissions down the street and say, hey, neurosurgeon, you know, I got this clot up here, and the son of a bitch wants $22,000 to take it out. And you show Hubert the X-ray, and he goes, shit, you know, $500. I'll take it out, right? But it was not simply a play on that they normally say delicate brain surgery. I point out it's indelicate in this case, which would be what I would be doing. If somebody comes and say, my mind's driving me crazy, I don't know whether I need some sort of, you know, surgery, whether I need years and years of analysis, my mind is driving me crazy. Why they would not come to me is I would perform indelicate neurosurgery, indelicate psychoanalysis. Not years, not days, now, right now. To them, that's indelicate. Like, well, I wanted to be cured, but, you know, goddamn, not that fast. Or, there's several versions of that. Yeah, I wanted to be cured, but not that cured. Or, yeah, I wanted to be cured, but, you know, not actually cured. I know. So I had the story representing what I would be doing. It'd be people saying, my mind is driving me crazy. And, here's the indelicate brain surgery of all. It's stopping around and say, well, you goddamn idiot, that's the point of the mind. Because what they say is driving me crazy is, I can't be satisfied. Well, if you were an ordinary, civilized person and satisfied, you would be dead. No. There is no way that a man can continue to, unless he can revert to some new level of idiocy on his own, can revert to any criticism of life, any criticism of himself, if he sees that there should be something pinned to his brain. If he can get in there, which I'm trying to do it for you, to at least open up your skull. That's what all this is. That's what all the great experiences, that's what the whole point of this is to realize, wait a minute, my mind is flypaper. This thing I think is driving me crazy? Here's why. But it's natural. It's why that surgeon wouldn't put up with it. What am I going to do if I get in there? I'm not going, I trained for this. I'm not going in there and waste my time on some little chicken shit thing that falls under the special category, if you call it that, of redundancy, or the naturally obvious. Sure, your mind's flypaper. Sure, your thoughts are flies. Oh, what the hell did you expect? What do you think's in there? Once you understand that, then you understand that everything that the mind ordinarily wants to criticize, every possible fault you find with life, the idiocy of life, it's not idiocy. It's the civilized fulfilling their never-ending responsibility, of which you are constantly a part yourself, unless you've separated from the flypaper, unless you can practice a non-attachment to it. Not arguing with it, not trying to bat flies, because you can kill flies. But I got news for you, Bunky. There are more flies than you'll ever be. Which is another version of saying, yeah, you can irritate life. It's possible that you can irritate life. But life can irritate you a lot more, which is what this is, which is what makes you work for life. But the never-ending job of the civilized is, through talk, the kinds of things that drive ordinary people nuts. Well, half of them drive the other half nuts, and so they take a second, and then this half drives the other half nuts, and then this half, and it goes back and forth. It's like a tennis game. That is progress. That is civilized progress, because the job of all civilized, sane, flypaper-minded people is, through their own talk, to continue to make life itself seem more and more complicated. And half the time, there are people believe they're staying on the sidelines. Like, well, it wasn't my serve right then, I don't have to play. And they go, and they look at people collecting stamps. They look at people whose hobby is the news. They look at people who go to church. They look at people who don't go to church. You look at somebody, and they always got new ideas of why we should all go back to church, why we should do so and so, and you think, God, it was bad enough as it was. Now they're making it worse. Wrong. They're not making it worse. They're making it more complicated. That's progress. But I've already admitted to you, it's the kind of progress that doesn't go anywhere. But what the hell you want? If that disturbs you, remember this. You still got flypapers.